All right, let's go ahead and get things kicked off. I want to first start by thanking all of you for taking time out of your day today to spend some time with us, maybe learn something. Something that I always enjoy about these webinars are kind of the comments. I think so many times being able to share your thoughts and share your best practices are really a big piece of these, right? So we'll talk about where to put your comments at and everything like that as we go. Now, why are we here today? I think the whole point of this presentation is to figure out what makes your shop better, right? And what do we mean by that? What makes you unique? And we're going to talk about a lot of different things in that regard as we move through the presentation. And not only that, but figuring out, once you figure out what makes you unique, how do you get the word out there? What do you do to show off how unique you really are? And I think in the current state of where we're at and struggling to find technicians, it's so important for you to be able to understand this. And so I look forward to seeing your comments throughout the presentation and really being able to offer insight here. So a couple things before we get rolling. First and foremost, everything that we're doing today is being recorded, so each registrant will get a copy of this presentation. I know a lot of you out there might be in the office and have people coming into your office to ask questions and maybe taking a phone call, and that's okay. We're going to be sending this out after the fact. But as you're engaged, one thing that I would really encourage is for you to use the chat. You can kind of see where the chat button is there for those of you that haven't used Zoom very frequently. I think it's really, again, a great thing to have you commenting, to have you talking, maybe share a best practice of something that you do within your shop so that the entire crowd can kind of learn from that. And we do have a lot of people on this webinar today. It was very well registered for. So obviously some need out there for this and something that I'm looking forward to talking about. Now, about WrenchWay, for those of you that might not be familiar, I think we state here our mission, right, which is to help solve the technician shortage. And the reason for that is this is not something that's just new, right? I think the pain is new, something that we've just really started to realize in trying to find technicians. But really, this has been brewing for quite some time. And when I say that, I grew up in a shop, and I remember my dad saying in the mid-90s that I can't find help. I can't find techs. And that had been really foreign to him probably 5 years prior to that. Now, granted, we grew up in a really small town. It was really tough to find people. That's really expanded now to where everybody's having this problem, right? It's not just the people in small rural communities that are having this issue. It's kind of everywhere. And it's really because there's just not enough bodies to fill all of the open positions that are out there. So really coming to that realization is really foundational to what we're doing, right? We're trying to help get the foundation of this industry into a better place so we're not so desperate for technicians, and really finding the right fits for the right people is really important. So we've got a variety of different solutions, and we'll talk about the top shops pages as we go through this. It's not a sales presentation by any stretch of the imagination. It's more to show you ways that we do it. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way for you, but being able to see what we put out there and maybe using those or putting those in your level of skills to be able to reach these technicians can be really helpful. We do have a variety of other things, really talking about schools, how you get involved with schools. That's not so much the focus of this one, but we've got some great tools between School Connect and Top Schools that are really helping build that foundation of technicians that we need into the business even further. If you haven't checked out School Connect, I would highly encourage it. It's free to everybody, free to shops, free to schools, and really we're trying to get you involved with that local school to help make that a better program overall. We also have one thing I didn't mention, our WrenchWay Insiders, which is really how we get feedback from the industry to put into things like this, to put into content so that we can learn and better understand from the people with boots on the ground, literal boots on the ground, what they're looking for and what we can do as an industry to help make their lives better. And a piece of that is reverse job posting. And I'll just touch on that very briefly, but just a piece of our app where technicians can essentially fill out a profile that doesn't say their name or where they work, but really kind of explains the details of the rest of what they have, right? So their experience, their education, what they're looking for in a shop, and then shops in their area are notified for them. So just a few things, a quick shout out to WrenchWay before we actually kick off the true presentation. Now, the presentation that we've got for today, we're going to start with talking about where we're at when it comes to technicians, and maybe a little bit of why there's an issue, but really just currently where we're at, coming to terms with the fact that there aren't enough technicians in this business to fill all the roles that are out there. And that's really foundational to everything else that we're going to talk about, right? So we are going to talk about strategies to understand what makes your shop unique, what makes your shop different from everybody else. And it really starts by listening, right? So we'll talk about surveying technicians. We'll talk about looking at your competition to see what's out there, and even maybe taking that a step further and looking at maybe not just other shops, but what are other industries doing, and really kind of hoping to open your brain a little bit to understand what's out there. And then also really kind of taking a look in the mirror and seeing, how competitive are we really when we look at our shop? Are we really what we think we are? And then being able to maybe take a little bit deeper of a dive into thinking about that, because that is so important. So once you understand all of that, you've got to tie it all together and tell your story, right? And being able to promote your strengths and really being able to really showcase what they are, so that that technician community can see it. And we'll walk through all of this, but just a quick overview of the agenda and why we're doing what we're doing today. One of the cool parts about our webinar for today is that we do have bonus content. So everybody that registered for this webinar will get various tip sheets and worksheets that will be emailed to them. And with those, we want you to use those, right? We want you to really have good internal conversations within the shop to understand where you are seen in the eyes of a technician, and then being able to really pick out those pieces of what makes you unique. So watch out for the star on those slides, because those are the things that we'll be sending you, so you don't have to try and scratch them down and try to capture all the information before we go to the next slide. So let's talk about the state of recruiting technicians. It's not easy, right? Obviously, if you're here, there's a reason you're here, and it's because finding technicians is a really, really hard thing to do. We've heard ad nauseum about the technician shortage, right? Any publication you go to, even some of the content that we put out, you hear about it over and over and over again. And I think it really comes down to you understanding that this isn't easy. And it's not just your shop that it's not easy for, right? It's not easy for really anybody. There are a few shops out there that I think have better luck than others, but maybe they're doing some of the stuff that we're about to talk to that does make it easier for them to do. So, it's almost like a support group to say, hey, you're not alone. We're here to help. But two, just really understanding it's not just you, right? Like being really, really able to grasp that this is an industry-wide problem, regardless of city, regardless of state. There's issues, and really those issues come from trying to find good people. And we talked about, really that there's this shortage, right? And all good techs, I think we can mostly agree on the fact that most good techs already have jobs. And in fact, the way that we look at it, we see that only 5% are actively looking. And those people, you can see the difference between the active and the passive candidates. But the active candidates are those that are out on job boards, they're cruising job boards constantly. They've got their resume up to date and they're ready to send it whenever somebody comes to call in. But really the reason why they're in that predicament might be because they're not a great technician. Of course, they could be moving across country or doing something different. But a lot of times those are the job hoppers. They're the people that aren't going to stay loyal to a shop. And that's maybe somebody that you want to kind of avoid. Now, on the other side of that, we've got our 20%. They're not actually candidates at all. They're really, really happy where they're at. They're not going anywhere. And we want to increase that pie. And while we want to increase that pie, what we find is that 75% are open to new opportunities, but they're not actively looking, right? They're not going to be the ones that are out browsing job boards every night. They're not going to be the ones that really even have a current resume. They're not actively looking. They're not wanting to talk to recruiters. They don't want to get bothered by anybody, right? They're content because they're getting a paycheck, but maybe they're dreading they're dreading Monday mornings, or really looking forward to Friday at 5 so they can get out of there for the weekend. And I think that's where we have a lot of risk, right? Where that technician that just isn't overly happy, and a lot of it could be because of maybe the manager that they're working for or the place that they're working for, something along those lines, something's not adding up and really making their life not all that desirable. And you hear it all the time. If you go out to a message board, you'll hear somebody feeling slighted because they're on flat rate, or maybe warranty pay is not where they want it at. Those are the people that we've got to listen to, right? We've got to understand what their pain points are, and then we've got to market our shops to those technicians that might be out there looking. And I think it's in a really, really different way than we've always been used to. This is where it's really, really important to understand that there really is a shortage. This has an impact on us. And regardless of how many times we bang that drum, sometimes that's really hard to understand. So making sure that you truly understand it and that you are coming to terms with it, putting together a plan, are essential to making your life easier. And when we come to terms with it, one of the major things that is hard to overcome is that there really isn't a silver bullet for finding technicians, right? I think in the past we would rely on one or two things and really hope for the best, but it really is hard to come to this realization. And I think that's before we get into all of the actual practices, that is really what it comes down to, is understanding that piece. Now, what happens when we do start looking? I think one of the funny things is the way that we have this laid out here, which was actually unintentional when we started this, but I think it's almost the process of how we, in our minds, look at this when we need a technician, right? So we have a tech quit, and we're like, okay, we got to get to this. We really need to find a technician. So we're going to hop out on Indeed and we're going to post a job ad. All right, a week goes by, 2 weeks go by, haven't heard anything. You start thinking to yourself, man, have we tried Facebook? Have we tried putting an ad out on Facebook? So you do that. Maybe you get a person here or there, but not having the greatest luck, and so then you're starting to get more frustrated, right? So you start asking around, hey, if you know of any techs, like, make sure you send them my way, and it kind of goes in one ear and out the other for a lot of technicians. But referral, and by the way, I still think referrals are one of the best ways to find technicians, but when you're doing it from a state of frustration, I don't think that word comes across as well. And so finally you go through all these things and you get to the bottom and you're like, we haven't tried schools lately. And so you call your local tech school and say, hey, you know what? I'm in the market for a tech. And then that tech school instructor says, hey, listen, all of our techs have jobs. They've already been taken. Our new recent graduates they're gone. They've been gone for a year. And so you're left with kind of this just general frustration that you're not able to just pull the trigger and have techs come in the door anymore. It is trying to be proactive. And I think all of these things work really well into a plan. And as I alluded to in the prior slide, there isn't one of these things that's just going to overwhelmingly help you fill all of your spots. So being able to incorporate all of these things it's really important. Now, we talk a lot about employer marketing and focusing on employer marketing. And what is that? Really, it's telling your story, and it's telling the story of the shop. I think the beautiful thing about business in general, the beautiful thing about shops in general, is that each shop has its own story. So being able to tell that story, when you've got that person that's been there for 40 years, or you've got a tech that just got their master certification, ASE master certification, being able to tell that story is a big deal, because you show that you're proud of that person. You show that you're proud of your company. And I think when you really take a storytelling approach to it, it really helps your pride grow, right? You've put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into your business, and you are proud of what it is. So make sure you get that out in front of people. And so really, how do we get started on this employer marketing side? And it all comes down to understanding what makes your shop unique and what makes it different from the crowd. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. One story that I've got, this is kind of a funny one that I've told before in some of our prior content, but I always think it's relevant, is that I came up with this part honestly on the fly when I was giving a presentation up in Minneapolis quite a few years back, but it's still very, very applicable. And what I did was I stood up on the stage and I said, okay, everybody, I started off the presentation this way. I said, everybody raise your hand if you need a technician. So of course, everybody in the room raised their hand. They needed a technician. And so I said, okay, that's great. Everybody raise your hand if you offer health insurance. Everybody raise their hand, or most people raise their hand. And then I just kept going through a list of benefits, right? And everybody kept raising their hand. And so at the end of that exercise, one, everybody's arms were tired because they've been raising their hand so much, but two, I made them look around and understand that the things that they were focusing on, the things that they thought were really, really unique, weren't. And it's kind of heartbreaking when you see that realization that all of the things they've been putting in job descriptions and everything that they'd been doing really they weren't things that were moving the needle. So we needed to really dive into what makes your shop unique. And so some of those common things, and I'm sure if you've been out to a job board and you see it, are that we're a family-owned company, that we have competitive pay and benefits. I always kind of challenge shops when I hear that. What does that even mean? Competitive pay and benefits, like being able to put some context behind it. The one that might drive me the most crazy are free uniforms. That's kind of an expectation. That's not a value add in a technician's eyes. That's something that they've come accustomed to, where they're expecting that, right? They're expecting that that's going to happen. Good management's always a funny one to me as well, because normally it's the manager writing that. And regardless of how great your management is, if everybody says they have good management, it's not really going to stand out, right? And so being able to really take a deep dive into these things and understand what is different about you, because we've worked with shops, thousands of shops all over the country, and each shop does have its own unique story. You just have to understand how to tell that story and really even understand what is unique about you. So a really good way of doing this is really starting off with being able to understand what your current people think of you, right? The technicians that are in the shop right now. One general practice that I see in a shop that also is to me not great is if you just throw a survey out there and hopefully they answer it, and you're trying to get feedback and they have got their names tied to it, and they wonder why am I getting the survey all of a sudden? Why all of a sudden are they caring about who I am or caring about how happy I am? And so being able to sit down with them ahead of doing a survey and say, hey, listen, we want to make sure this is a really, really good place to work at. And we want to really truly understand what it is that you're doing, or what we can do to make your life easier. An example of this is one that we did a podcast with Tim Winkler from VIP Tires and Service. If you're out there, Tim, this is a really great shout out to you. But what they did was they took a true survey, and they do it every year, and it's really, really candid. And if you listen to that podcast episode, Tim goes into a lot of detail on what went into that survey. And they brought back all of the answers and they read them aloud in front of the entire technician group. And some of them weren't so flattering, right? And I think that's a really, really important piece, is when you get that feedback and when you get that information, not to take it defensively, but actually use that in a really, really proactive way and use it in a constructive way, right? I think everybody says they love constructive criticism, but when they get it, it's really hard to take. It's really hard to eat. So being able to really take that as a shop and do something productive with it is such an important piece. So when you get that idea and you sit down and talk with your team, and just truly tell them you want to know what it's like to work there, you want to make it easy for them, right? So you keep it anonymous. Please do not include names. Nobody's going to be candid with you if they have to include names. Do it online, because people can tell handwriting. If you're doing surveys with paper, please don't. You're able to tell when somebody can't really, we've all seen handwritten work orders before. A lot of them aren't pretty, right? So being able to do it online and be able to do it without judging somebody's handwriting or whatever, just truly taking the feedback for what it is, rather than trying to put somebody that puts it out there in a bad spot. I know there's been a lot of companies that I've heard from, not just in our industry, but every industry, where they ask for feedback from their team and then they'll scold the team, which completely defeats the purpose, because you're never going to get candid feedback from there on out. So keep it anonymous, keep it short. You don't want books written or really asking that much of them. You just want that open candor, right? You want the people to really tell you what's on their mind, and hopefully you're having meetings along the way and being able to really dissect what they're thinking even prior to this. But surveying is a really good way to get some things out that maybe haven't been in the past. So make sure that they're open-ended questions. Stay away from the yes/no questions. Stay away from vague answers, right? So think of that when you write the questions. Be intentional with the questions that you're writing, because that's a really, really big piece of this. And then offer some type of incentive. Maybe it's a gift card to go get coffee. It doesn't have to be huge in money-wise, monetarily, but it does have to be something, right? If they're going to go out of their way to do this and you explain it up front how you want it done, make sure that you reward them for doing that. And then lastly, there are all kinds of survey tools out there, right? And most of them are free to very minimal cost. We've put a few examples here between Typeforms, SurveyMonkey, Google Forms. I've used all of them. They're all extremely easy to use, and you can do all of the things we just talked about within those tools. So make sure you go out, use those tools, and use this advice, because I think that can be really, really helpful. All right. So when we're talking about a survey and we're talking about what questions to ask, here's a list of some, and you can see our first starred document that will be sent out to you. These are really meant to get your mind going, right? You don't specifically have to use these questions, but there's something that I love here, the third point down, which is, what are 3 things you love most about working here? And really getting them thinking about, what is it that I like working here? Is it the people? Is it, the management system? It's no BS. We get right to work. I like to stay in my bay. Understand what that is. And then the last bullet point there, what are some things that you think our shop can improve upon? And hopefully, if you ask the questions in the right way and you've set it up the right way, you're going to get some of that candid feedback. You're going to get technicians talking, and the more you can get them talking, the more you can pick little slices out of there, right? You can pick little pieces out of there, and I think that is really, really important. One thing I forgot to mention at the top while I'm doing the presentation, with the Q&A, we'll work to answer the Q&A at the very end. So please keep the questions coming. We'll get to them, and we'll talk about them openly. And then I do see that the chat is, I see the chat's going crazy. Keep it going. Keep talking about this stuff. Maybe even throw some questions out there that you've asked to your technicians, because I think it's really important that we get as many opinions as we can here. All right, so let's talk about competition, and really looking at the competition and understanding what they are offering. Maybe they are offering something unique and they are doing a good job telling their story of why they're unique, but you've got to go out and find that. So find out what your competitors are offering, tech, so you know where you stand. I think if you're honest with yourself, you're going to see where you line up against that shop, and truly understand that that's a competition for those techs, right? So maybe there's a technician that doesn't work at either of those shops, your shop or that shop, but you've got that technician coming in from nowhere and they're assessing the two of you. And that's when it becomes a real competition, right? That's when you're compared to the shop down the road, and you better be in line. We'll talk about some of that as well, but being competitive is such an important piece, and understanding that you are competitive and where you stand in the market is huge. So we've given you a few different options of ways to research your competitors. Of course, you can go check out Top Shops. And one thing I'd say about the top shops listings is maybe don't even look at the shops in your general area. Go look at shops in a different part of the country and see what they have to offer and see what their shops look like. The top shops pages do a phenomenal job of laying them out. And there's a lot of really, really good shops on there, right? So from both the independent side and the dealership side, from both the automotive side and the diesel side, there's an abundance of shops out there that you can do your research on and see what they're doing that maybe you're not, and maybe something that you can add to your rapport. A shop website, obviously, if you're going out and you're researching competitors, being able to go to a website, seeing what they offer. One thing I'd caution with the websites is oftentimes they're not overly transparent, right? They're not telling you a whole lot about what job they have open. So that's one piece of it, but being able to put all these pieces together. The next slide, we talk about, we have a comparison spreadsheet that we're going to send everybody. This is really where you'll break that down. But what you're wanting to assess, I mean, you want to know where the salary is at, right? Because that's going to impact you at your local level. You want to see what benefits they're offering and what perks. You know, there are things out there that maybe you haven't even thought of. And if you've ever talked to anybody that's worked at a tech company, you find some pretty unique benefits, right? It's something as simple as a Spotify or a Sirius XM subscription for their people goes a really, really long way and isn't overly expensive. So just looking for opportunities to look at benefits and really be able to put yourself up against those types of companies it can be a really, really great exercise. Now, we have a line here, and I wouldn't say that this is the most encouraging line, especially if it was coming from a technician, but you don't need to be the best at everything, right? But you don't want to be the worst at anything. I would find a couple things that you are the best at and that you can confidently say, not only to somebody that's looking at your shop from the outside, but somebody from the inside. If you can really say with confidence, hey, we're the best at these two things, that's what makes you unique. That's different. And I think that is what you're really looking for at the end of the day. So again, you've got this start at the bottom. This is something we'll be sending out to all registrants, but it's a comparison spreadsheet and it's nothing crazy, right? If you look at the top, you put your shop's name, competing shops throughout the top line there. And then you're just going through and jotting notes, right? Being able to document what you're doing research on. And the more research you do, the more you learn about your market. And the internet's a beautiful thing in that way, right? Where you have access to a lot of different things. So being able to dive into this, being able to look through this and take notes, and that other section on the bottom there is really important, because all of those benefits that that are mentioned here are the same things that I talked about when going through that presentation I mentioned, where we had people that were raising their hand for every single one of these. Now, the one thing I'll say is just because you offer it doesn't mean it's great, right? There's a reason people love working for the government, and it's not because of the pay, it's because of the benefits, right? So being able to get that detail into a spreadsheet and really being able to analyze it is essential. And that last section, the other, is really big, because that's where you're going to get some tips and insights into what somebody else is offering that maybe that you currently aren't. But if you can figure out a way to build your way to that benefit, you're adding something that makes your shop more attractive. So just going to take a peek here quick at the chat. All right, lots of good stuff. Paul, I see you're out there. We'll answer that and get to that right at the end here. So when we talk about the assessment and what you're going to dive into, you want to know details. You don't want just a vague piece of what you're offering or what your competition is offering. So being able to dive into different compensation ranges, and that might take going into 3 different job postings on a website to see where they're at, or tracking them down on Indeed or ZipRecruiter or CareerBuilder, any of the career sites. But being able to actually dive into a bit of detail is pretty darn important. Now, you also want to get that detailed information, as I mentioned on the prior slide, not just kind of glossing over and saying, oh, they offer health insurance, or oh, they offer dental insurance. there's different packages. Anybody that's put together a package for a health plan, a health insurance plan for their business knows there's a menu of different things that you can select, and some are really good, some are not great. And I've had that experience where I've been on the employee side and had a change of benefits prior to a major life event, and it had a big impact. It cost me a lot more money, and to be frank, I was pissed about it, right? So I think being able to understand that and really give your team the ability to look at what they've got and know that it's good, right? Know that it's not, kind of not great. Like, you would sign up to go work there, right? And I think putting yourself in a tech shoes when you're looking through this is really important as well. But being able to know that when I go work for you and you've got a great career development plan, and I know that I'm not just a number because you're trying to develop me, you're trying to make me better, and you're not so worried about me leaving, right? Like, you're worried about me as a person, and granted, that helps you produce more, but there's a difference, right? You can tell when somebody truly cares about people. And I think that is highlighted in career development and the hiring process, everything. If you can assess everything, you can make a pretty good judgment on how good a business is. Our third step, and anybody that's ever read a business book or has taken a business class has heard of a SWOT analysis. And SWOT is an acronym for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And most times it's used when you're looking at a business as a whole, right? When you're looking at comparing yourself to a neighboring business and you're trying to figure out maybe how to add to your product line or make something better. It's a pretty common exercise within the business world. But what we want you to do is look at this through the eyes of a technician and look at this as you're analyzing your plan and what you're offering to a technician. So in our example, we've got a number of different things. We'll of course be sending this out to everybody, but looking at your strengths. If you do have a good career plan for a technician when they come in, technicians love training. That's a really great thing. If you do have paid training, believe it or not, there's still a lot of shops out there that don't pay for their techs to go to training. That is still a benefit. And we use this ASE certification one, again, pointing to Tim at VIP Tires and Service, where they pay for all of their ASE certifications for the technicians, whether they pass them or fail them, right? It's very important to them. They've stated that. But that's also a huge strength of theirs when maybe that young aspiring tech looks to come in and wants to get all of those things, but maybe can't afford it up front. So that's a big thing. Opportunities that are out there. I think when you look at this and you've done the analysis that we talked about in prior slides, looking at opportunities is a huge, huge deal. And really, you want to look at it from the standpoint of what makes your job more attractive, right? What are ways that we can put together and we can implement internally to make this more attractive to a technician? And maybe you don't have all of those unique qualities that we talked about earlier, but maybe you've desired to want to get them, right? So maybe you can put together a plan to make your offering better. So a few opportunities that we saw. Steve's Auto Care is closing in the fall. Maybe they're a reputable shop that have been around for a lot of years and they're closing up doors. I know with the current consolidation environment, I think that's actually more and more realistic. But being able to identify that, I actually have in my past found a technician that very same way. So when I was running a shop, I had heard that there was a shop closing. Went ahead. I didn't really know the techs at all. Kind of knew one. So called them up, said, hey, I just heard, there might be a upcoming change in your plans, and we'd love it if you'd stop by and talk to us. That's an opportunity, right? That's something you want to identify ahead of time and get out in front of, because I wasn't the only person to call that individual, right? There were a number of other shops that called, but I was the first one to call. I was ready for it. So we ended up hiring this individual, and he ended up being a great technician. The other thing you want to look at in a SWOT, and this is oftentimes really tough to talk about, are the weaknesses. And the weaknesses really make you look in the mirror and see, hey, what are we not doing great? What do we need to get better at? And so if you did have poor reputation in the past because of some unforeseen circumstance, or because you had poor leadership or weak leadership in the past. Being able to really stare at that in the mirror and address it rather than trying to dodge it is a big piece of this. And we actually, one client comes to mind in the past that really couldn't get past that part, right? Where they couldn't understand why technicians wouldn't want to come work for them. And when we would talk to technicians, you would hear consistently that the turnover was really, really high because they had terrible management in the past. And yet you'd go out to their job ad and it would say great management and everything's wonderful. And we wonder why technicians question when we write that, right? So that was a one example of where a shop owner or shop manager really couldn't get past that. And that's too bad, because that's going to hurt you if you can't come to the realization that maybe there was something in your past that wasn't so flattering that's now changed. Or if it hasn't changed, make sure you get it changed. But if it has changed, you want to make sure that you don't try to dodge it, hit it head on. And I think you'll get a lot more respect from technicians because you are hitting it head on. Now, the threats, we put supply chain issues and growing shortage of technicians. One thing that I would add in there in terms of threats are the pressures that shops are facing right now with increasing salaries, right? This, because there's a shortage, it's just like anything else. If there's more jobs than there are people to fill it, it's basic economics, right? There's not enough supply to meet the demand. And so that's going to put pressure on you as a shop. So not only are you looking at this through the lens of a technician and trying to understand what the threats are for you to bring technicians in, you've got to be a little bit more forward thinking and saying, okay, has this gotten drastically better in the last year or two? No, in fact, it's probably gotten worse. And what that's going to do is put pressure on us to increase our pay to technicians. And in order to do that, we're going to have to raise our labor rate. So then it brings on a whole other set of problems, right? Because then you're talking about increasing your labor rates. And I think there's a lot of shops out there across the country that could do themselves a huge benefit by being able to look realistically at their labor rates and be able to adjust accordingly. Because in my opinion, those salaries aren't going down anytime soon. You need to be prepared. You need to be competitive. And if you're not competitive and it's because you don't charge appropriately, make sure you get in line. Make sure you are charging what you're worth. Don't shortcut yourself, or really don't underestimate your value, because you're putting value out into these communities. You need to charge appropriately. And if you look at any of the other skilled trades, they don't mind charging appropriately. I just had a plumber at my house, and they certainly don't mind charging appropriately. So something that, excuse me, in a lot of ways, I feel like we need to catch up with. And really, it takes the whole community, right? We can't have a race to the bottom where we're just trying to cut each other's labor rates and being competitive. Everybody's got business right now. Like, that shouldn't be a problem. We need to get our labor rates in check. So we've done this work. We've understood really what makes us unique. We've understood where our competitors are at. We're confident in our offering. And now it's time to get the word out there and really show people why you're a good place to work. Now, the number one thing I would advise here is don't promote the job, promote the profession. Really show these people as people in prominent positions, that people that are respected, right? I think if you look back to older times, it was more of that grease monkey mentality where technicians really didn't get the benefit of the doubt. And in fact, a lot of times consumers really questioned whether they were doing the right things or not. So I think telling your story not only helps with technicians, but I think it helps gain trust with your customers. So we've got a couple of examples here. This is one that I see all the time, where you've got Buck's Auto Repair saying, "We're hiring, come join our team." And the technician on the other side is saying, "Okay, why?" Right? Conversely, if you go over and you say, check out our latest Shop Talk video where Master Tech Stan talks through how our mentorship program works, including how he gets paid to mentor our new techs. It puts a little bit of a different light on it, right? It really, it shows, one, that you value a tech enough to make them a mentor, right? That they've put their time in, and you think they're good enough to be able to influence the young people that are coming into the shop. But then it shows that young tech that, hey, when you come here, you're not going to be hung on an island. We're not going to throw you on the oil rack for 3 years and then hope that you get over to the main shop. we're actually taking you seriously here. We want to grow you. And I think a lot of times with a lot of shops talking about growing their own technicians, that's one major thing we're missing, right? Is talking about that, talking about, how good of a program that you have. And going back to the SWOT, if you don't have a great mentorship program or you don't have a great training program to bring them up, that's a really easy thing to start tweaking right now and start working at. Start building your program so that you can have a pipeline of good young talent coming up into your shops. And again, remember, all of these techs have jobs, right? All the good techs have jobs, but the majority of them are open to opportunities. So why not be in front of them and really tell your story? Again, that employer branding piece, right? Tell your story. And these are really, really good ways to do that. Now, another really good way to do that is through video. And I think when you look at video, there's no surprise that it's effective, right? Photos and video are why Instagram is so popular, and a lot of the reason why Facebook is so popular. But video talks to people, right? It's not just script, it's not just words, it's actually people talking. And being authentic is such an important piece of that, right? Getting on and having people tell their stories. And I'm a huge fan of individuals telling their stories, right? That's on our podcast, Beyond the Wrench. That's what we talk about all the time. I open up every podcast by listening to what the story is on the person that I'm interviewing, because I think it's really important. And I just frankly love to hear other people's stories, their success stories, and really maybe some of the stuff that they've gone through to get to the point that they're at, because it's not all been rosy. I think there's a lot of that in a shop that maybe we miss out on by not being authentic. And so you also want to keep it short. Nobody's going to watch a long, half-hour long video. If you keep it 2 to 3 minutes long, people will actually watch the whole video, and what you're saying will get across to them. And another point here is going deep, not wide, right? So don't just try to skim over a subject or not touch on it in detail. There's no excuse for that. Get deep into it. Get deep into understanding why the technicians like working there, or why you manage a certain way. I think there's all kinds of content. I'm super jealous of every shop out there, because you've got content rolling in the door every single day. And so being able to talk to the technicians, being able to hear their stories, and then being able to put them out, and not only the technicians, but the shop itself, right? Maybe there's been some obstacles you've had to get around as a shop, and you can tell those stories. And I think at the end of the day, they trust you more, right? If you're telling stories and they're truthful, I don't know who's ever been to a cocktail party and listened to somebody tell a great story and not been captivated by it, right? So I think being able to tell your story and doing it in a way that actually brings some type of education to them, or tells them a story, possibly inspires them to be better, is great. So you don't want to be salesy. Please, for the love of God, do not be salesy, because techs will see right through that. If you just go on and say, hey, we've got great job opportunities here, it's defeating the whole purpose of doing video in the first place. So actually get out there, tell stories. Don't try to sell yourself to them. Just be yourself. Just be yourself. Show personalities. That's what people love, are personalities. And lastly, promote the industry. I think if you're talking to that young person, or possibly that young parent, or a parent of a young person, and you're able to show a different side of the industry than maybe they've ever seen before, they might be more apt to allow their student, maybe their high school student or middle school student, to be open to a career path in our industry. So just a few different tips there, and different ideas. We show a Top Shops page here, and we take pride in how easy it is to put video out there, but this anybody can do, right? So being able to do a shop tour and show off the cool things in the shop, maybe it's a new scan tool, maybe you got a new hoist, whatever it is, being able to show off the things in the shop are such a big deal. Recognizing and congratulating employees is such an awesome way to go out and be authentic and be proud, because that person put time in. I saw one from a local business last night on Facebook that's not even in the automotive industry, but I know the ownership of this business really well. And you could just hear it coming through on how proud they were of this person for getting a certificate that was hard to get, right? So I think when you do that, you not only help with the recruiting, you help with the retention. And so we've got a variety of different things here that you can do. Highlight the fun stuff you do. If you're out grilling out and you do that every Friday during the summer, in Wisconsin, it'd be really hard to do that during the winter. But if you're doing that during the summer, you're doing fun things, maybe you've got a bowling outing, whatever it is, show off that you're a good place to work. You want to be the fun, trendy place to go work at. And if you have things that you can do that drive that, document it. Really embrace it, because that's really great. And getting the information out there before the interview, again, regardless if you have a Top Shops page or not, being able to be transparent up front is vital. It is really, really important. And it's important to get them to actually look at you seriously, right? Because if it's just looking like every other job post that's out there, and we talked about it earlier in the presentation, how everybody's benefits or what makes them unique is the same thing in their written paragraph. It's really hard to stay on that, right? It's really hard to see that. But if you get the information out there and you allow them to do their due diligence, that is super important. And if you look at your house buying experience right now, you're not just going through the state paper and trying to pick out what house you want to go to an open house at. You're going and you're doing your due diligence ahead of time. So if that $10,000 tax bill every year is out of your budget, you're not even going to go see that place, right? So being able to do that due diligence is highly, highly important. And then getting, we've talked about putting this content together and really the importance of finding what's unique, creating content around it. And then the last piece is trying to get that out to everybody. As this slide says here, company social posts reach 561% further when shared by employees versus company social pages. That's a pretty big percentage, right? So it's not only that you're sharing it, it's how you're sharing it. Can you get your team to share it for you? And even in those posts, if they like working for you and you found that through the surveying, you should be really comfortable with them sharing your content. And back to another point with a slide previously, where you don't want to be salesy with that either, right? If you just constantly every week or every month are putting out a video or a post that's saying we're hiring, and we want our team to share that, it's just not going to go very far. Get good content out there so that they're proud of working there. And rather than just saying, hey, we're hiring again, this is why I'm proud to work at this company. This is why they're different than everybody else. And if you've got people on your team that are telling other people that it's a different place to work at, I think you're going to have a lot more success when it comes to actually finding those technicians. So next steps, and then we'll get to the Q&A in the chat here just to see if we've got questions. If you do have questions right now, feel free to throw those out there. But we will be emailing you a kit with all of the worksheets that we had starred over the course of the presentation. It'll include the survey of your technicians, the tips, the free tools, the competition assessment tool, and then really the assess your shop tools. Everything that we had highlighted over the course of the presentation will be given to you. Please use the tools, use them in your leadership meetings, sit down and actually go through them and analyze them, because you're going to learn things. And when you start to take this seriously, that's when your luck will change, right? When you start to understand that you're either great at something or you're terrible at something. If you're terrible at something, that's not the end of the world. You got to fix it, but it's not the end of the world. Being able to dive into that and truly understanding that is so vital to the future of technician recruiting. I hate to say it, but the businesses that don't do this are truly going to be left behind. Make sure you take it seriously. It is hugely important. And that's it for me. So I thank everybody for coming today, and the chat and the questions, it looked like were phenomenal. I didn't quite get to spend as much time on them, but I'm going to look at a couple of questions here. So Paul Essie from Zimbrick. Jay, do you have any examples of surveys you have seen that have worked well in gathering honest info? Paul, I would direct you to the podcast episode we did with Tim Winkler, where he talked about the whole process of how they got good, honest survey results and how they analyzed them and how they took the critical feedback. That whole episode is a masterclass on how to survey. I thought it was just an incredible episode. We can send you the link if needed. And then Carly Elkins says, how do you address public comments and reviews about your company due to bad past management, but has since gotten better? Carly, I think, one, it's great that you just even acknowledge that in the first place and know that that's the perception of who you are. I guess my way of thinking in general is to hit it head on, right? If you're talking to a technician that's out there, being able to address those questions up front or talk about the past experience. I wouldn't go into just completely bashing the prior manager or anything like that, but talk about the things you've done to improve the business since maybe their friend had a bad experience with you. And then the other piece to that is telling your story of where you're at right now. We talked about this over the course of the entire presentation, but the more you can get out there and tell your story of who you are now, the less the past matters, right? So being able to kind of address it in two different ways there, I think are really, really great ways to do that. I think that was our last question. I again, just want to say thank you to everybody. This was hopefully a good use of your time. And just reading through all the comments here, thank you to everybody that was out there commenting, talking. I can't wait to read all the comments and see if there are any best practices out there or just to hear the comments in general. So thank you all so much for attending today. And if you ever have any questions or anything like that, feel free to reach out to either myself or the WrenchWay team. You see my contact information there at the bottom. Thank you and have a good day.